All right, everyone, we're going to get started here. I want to welcome everybody to Naturalist Nights. My name is Ben Sherman. I'm a winter naturalist here at ACES. Naturalist Nights is a 10-week free speaker series in the Roaring Fork Valley, hosted by a partnership between the Wilderness Workshop, Aspen Center for Environmental Studies, and the Roaring Fork Audubon. These talks are hosted each week through mid-March in Carbondale at 5:30 and here at ACES at 7 p.m. on Thursdays. Cycling through should be tonight's Naturalist Night series sponsors. We'll see them come up in just a little bit here. Those are lots of our generous sponsors. And then a special shout out to tonight's featured sponsor. It's Craig Ward with Aspen Snowmass Sotheby's International Realty. We'll see it coming through on a slide in just a moment here. These businesses provide financial and in-kind donations, which cover travel expenses for our speakers and provide the money that goes to Grassroots TV for recording these presentations, really making Naturalist Nights possible. Grassroots TV airs these presentations on Channel 12 Up Valley and Channel 82 Down Valley. These videos will also be available for viewing later on our website. Next week's presentation will be Dr. Scott A. Taylor, and his presentation will be Guarding the World's Finest Guano, a story of ecology and economy. Should be a cool presentation. But I would like to introduce tonight's speaker, David Anderson. Dave is a natural historian who works with the full spectrum of Colorado's conservation community in order to support informed decision-making in our state. As a biology major at CU, Dave became interested in alpine and Arctic plants. He went on to study the ecology of Arctic plants in the Canadian High Arctic and in graduate school at the University of Washington. After grad school, he and his wife joined the Peace Corps and taught middle school science in the Solomon Islands. Not long after their return, Dave began working for the Colorado Natural Heritage Program, or CNHP, first as a botanist and now as the director of the program. CNHP supports sustainable conservation and management by keeping track of rare species, plant communities, wetlands, and protected areas throughout the state of Colorado. CNHP provides this information to a range of partners to help them make well-informed conservation decisions. CNHP also creates a variety of models and tools to help support conservation. It is an honor to welcome Dave to our 2018 Naturalist Nights.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you all very much. It is really a tremendous honor to come here, to be invited and get to talk with you about Colorado's natural history. Something that I know all of you are very interested in and excited about. And it's a particular honor to be part of a speaker series that involves a talk especially dedicated to guano. That is beyond cool, and I am going to watch that talk. It is going to be interesting. So the presentation that ACES has asked me here to give was taken from a talk I gave for a plenary at the Natural Areas Association conference in October about Colorado's natural history. So I've modified that talk quite a bit to try to infuse local elements of natural history into it for the Roaring Fork Valley and the area that we're in, to try to bring it home a little bit. So there's a lot of both in here. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about some things that we have going on here that the Colorado Natural Heritage Program is working on here in the Valley. This is the title that goes on the playbill for my talk, The Life and Times of Colorado, Our State's Natural History. And like many of you, I bet a lot of you have loved old natural history texts And they are lots of fun to read. They're full of flowery language, you know, back in the last couple of centuries of natural history writing. And this is the document is the Natural History and Antiquities of Selborne in the county of Southampton, to which are added the Naturalist Calendar, observations of various parts of nature, and poems. That's an awesome title. And so I decided to create a real title for my talk that doesn't fit on the playbill in honor of these kinds of titles. So the actual title of my talk is The Natural History of Colorado, wherein is contained the whole discourse and description of the landscape, its history and changes over time, and the species occupying this region, their relationships to each other and manner of assembling into repeating patterns on the landscape, particular noteworthy taxi, and stories of leading explorers, and a poem. So, taking that apart, it's kind of going to look like this. We're going to talk about what natural history is, which is particularly relevant for this series of talks. And I'll go over a few things happening in the valley and kind of how our program supports those things. And then we'll delve into the deep history of Colorado, looking at its geology, ancient climates, its beasts and landscapes. Then we'll explore the present and the future natural history of Colorado, looking at some key ecological systems of Colorado and the denizens thereof, the changing face of Colorado. And then we will not talk about dead white guys, and we will also not have enough poems. So here we go. So what is natural history? And this is a question that I became really interested in when I was asked to speak about the natural history of Colorado, because we are a natural heritage program. So I was like, I really should know what the difference between these two things is. And it's an interesting distinction between natural history and natural heritage. Natural history is a really time-honored tradition of observation-based information about plants and animals, the places they live, and the ways that they interact. And that's kind of boiled down from the Oxford English Dictionary's definition of that term. And so the emphasis there is on observation. It's very focused on the collection of information from the natural environment. It's not so much experiment-based in its purest form. So natural heritage is a concept that we believe started with Lyndon B. Johnson. He's the first person we know of who's coined this term. And it refers to the nature that we have inherited from our forefathers. It thinks of natural history in terms of our inheritance and in terms of our responsibility to take good care of it and pass it on to future generations. And so it was first used by Lyndon B. Johnson, then by Jimmy Carter. And it was really embraced by the Nature Conservancy. And at that time, in the 1970s, the Nature Conservancy established the whole network of natural heritage programs. There's a program like mine in every state and in all of the Canadian provinces and territories and in 16 Latin American countries. All of us are united under a nonprofit called NatureServe. We all work together, we use similar methods, and all of our data get rolled up together so that we can look at natural history across the scale of a municipal park all the way up to a hemisphere, or the globe. So it's a cool thing that kind of came out of this thinking. And some of the programs, the natural heritage programs, don't all have the same name like ours. Some of them have natural history in the name because they focus on documenting natural history. So just to kind of boil down a little bit about what we do, we pay attention to what species and communities, I'm sorry, that's kind of redundant. We document what species and communities we should be paying attention to. And we use scientific data on what we know about these species to help determine what their conservation priorities need to be. Because we have limited conservation dollars, we need to put those on the ground in the most effective possible way. So our programs help identify what the rare species are, what should be listed endangered, what should be sensitive, what don't we have to worry about. We also pay attention to where these targets of conservation are located, because we can't do effective conservation if we don't know where our elements of biodiversity are. And we keep track of how they're doing. So this is a map here showing all about 30,000 locations of rare animals in red, plants in green, and plant communities in blue. Animals are blue, plant communities are red. And we have information on how all of those locations are doing and can rank them along a continuum of conservation status with that information. And then the last key thing that heritage programs do is identify what places and landscapes we should be paying attention to, because most people who are decision makers find it very difficult to focus on things at this level. But we can look at big landscapes here. These are Colorado's potential conservation areas. These indicate the very best places for us to focus on biodiversity conservation. These are opportunities for us to save nature. And so the pink ones that you see in this map here are ones that are of extremely high biodiversity significance. There's about 40 of those in Colorado, and those pink areas indicate places where a particular species is kind of making its last stand. That's a place where if we don't manage for a particular species, we're quite likely to lose it. So that's kind of what we do at the grand scale at Colorado Natural Heritage Program and at all the other natural heritage programs. And here's something that we've been talking a lot about with people in our community here. This was a biological inventory we finished in 1999, in which we identified 55 of those potential conservation areas, and 77 species of concern were found when we did that work. And 10 of those sites are of very high biodiversity significance. So the Roaring Fork Valley is a pretty important place for biodiversity conservation. And this is what that map looks like. We know that this has gotten kind of dated now. We need to revisit this map and help define the important directions for conservation moving forward in the Roaring Fork Valley. And so it takes a lot of work to survey an entire county. So what we've done to make that a manageable enterprise is to look at the habitats very carefully for the target species and narrow down the landscape to where we really think we're going to find rare species when we do a project like this. So this was kind of a start. We're planning to take this another step forward, and I'll tell you about that in a second here. But currently, the projects we have going on are to help the Pitkin Open Space and Trails add more information to the Pitkin Outside website. So you're going to be able to drill down much further into data and information about each of the Pitkin Open Space and Trails sites through this enhanced website that we're helping them out with. We're also doing bioblitzes. This coming summer will be the third year that we've done bioblitzes on a ranch near Carbondale called the Spring Valley Ranch. It's adjacent to the Spring Valley campus of CMC. And we're also doing a lot of bat surveys and monitoring with Colorado Parks and Wildlife and the White River National Forest. There's some really amazing bat populations here in the Roaring Fork Valley. We're just over the hill, working in Lake County this past couple summers and this coming summer, doing inventories of wetlands and uplands. And we're about to get going on something called the Biodiversity and Connectivity Initiative. And this is an effort that's being channeled through a nonprofit that Tom Cardamone is standing up. In this project, we're going to focus on connectivity of habitats for deer, elk, bighorn sheep, and focus on some of the critical habitats for them, which are going to be aspen and riparian areas. And so that project we're planning to have on the ground this coming summer. We're also going to be doing a survey of the South Canyon area, which is owned by the city of Glenwood Springs, just west of the city near I-70. And some of you might have heard about this. I guess there's been some articles in the paper now about the city's plans to do some developments and improvements in that on that property. So we're going to do biodiversity surveys of that property to help make sure that they know that they're empowered with the knowledge of their natural heritage resources so that they can plan developments around those and help ensure that we don't lose those. And then we're also talking about partnering with ACES to do some bioblitzes on the ACES properties in future years, celebrating their 50 years of success. So we'll see what we end up doing with that. That's very much been just a conversation so far. And so the partners that we work with on all of these projects are what make them successful, because we're at Colorado State University, based in Fort Collins, and our program is part of the university, but we're funded entirely through contracts, agreements, and donations to the program. And we work all over the state, but everything we do is entirely partnership driven, and the things that we do are meant to support people who are on the ground, who are actually going to do management and development and conservation, because our program doesn't do any of that. We're sort of a decision-making support brain trust for helping people do good work. So our partners are where it all really comes together. And so we're working with partners in the Valley and also these kind of statewide federal and state and orgs that we've worked with on just about all of our projects somehow. So the Biodiversity and Connectivity Initiative is coming up soon, and we're doing that because of concern for wildlife and movement between seasonal habitats for those large ungulates. And we know that we have opportunities now to enhance wildlife connectivity in the Roaring Fork Valley. And we know that right now is the ideal time to do something about it, because conservation efforts are only going to get more complicated and expensive as prices increase and more people move here. So this is a good opportunity right now. And that in order to put conservation on the ground effectively, we need to identify the best possible options for connectivity. Where do we still have some connectivity that we can protect? Where do we have missing connectivity that we need to create? And that might even look like something like an overpass or an underpass under Highway 82. We don't know yet. And we acknowledge that we all want to live in a place that's optimal for people and nature. I mean, why do we live here in the Roaring Fork Valley? I mean, that's why we're here. That's what makes it wonderful. It's what really makes all of Colorado wonderful. So, and that's what we're just trying to help with at Colorado Natural Heritage Program. So the way that all of this starts, data and science are where everything begins in conservation. And so we have to document biodiversity first. And so these are my young daughters venturing forth to do that, using the traditional tools of the trade. And Mia's not very excited about it at this time. But these are the exact kinds of tools that we're using at the Spring Valley Ranch BioBlitzes. And I wanted to feature that with you a little bit because the ranch owner, John Powers, wanted me to invite the community to this event this year. So he's really interested in having people from the valley come and see his ranch and help us discover biodiversity on that ranch. And if you're interested in doing that, I brought a pile of my business cards, or you can write down my email and shoot me an email. And then as I start to figure out when this is going to happen, it's starting to look like May is when this will happen. And I can get in touch with you and help connect you up with things. So the reason that we're doing BioBlitzes is to conduct a rapid study of a particular property. A BioBlitz is done over the course of a day or two or three. And during that time, you try to find as much biodiversity as you can. And it's a really great way to engage people in conservation and connect them to the land. And so we are inviting experts, to help us identify things, students to learn, and community members to learn and tell us and share their knowledge of the natural history on these sites. And so we're really interested in the learning, outreach, connecting, and inspiring parts of doing a BioBlitz and getting people excited about what they have in their neighborhood. So this is something that you'll see happening. Lots of people are doing BioBlitzes. The National Park Service loves these. And we're involved in a lot of them throughout the state every year. And so when you're documenting biodiversity, whether that be through the kinds of field research that our program does all over the state, through a BioBlitz, or through citizen science, one of the most important parts of that are the natural history collections, where we have specimens that are used to give us definitive documentation of the presence of a species at a particular site. And so this is the New York Botanic Gardens herbarium, and it's institutions like these that we rely on to make those maps that I showed you, to know where our biodiversity resources are. And there's some important considerations for collecting specimens in nature. And this is the best example of it I know of in Colorado. This is one of our 21 native orchid species called Malaxis brachypoda. And this orchid has only ever been seen at 3 tiny populations here in Boulder, Jefferson, and El Paso counties. And I had the chance to do some research on this species for the Forest Service several years ago. And I dug up all of the specimens I could find at institutions all across the country, from Smithsonian to Colorado Herbaria. And each one of these is a label from an herbarium specimen. And I ended up finding more squished Malaxis brachypodas in herbaria than have ever been seen on the ground in Colorado. So almost all the Malaxis brachypodas we know of ever having been in Colorado are squished in herbaria. So a lot of this happened back in the days when Mr. Audubon went birding with a little bird shot gun, and back in the day, that's how we documented biodiversity. We blasted it and we dug it up and we squished it and we collected it. And we still do that, and for goodness sakes, we need to keep doing that. It's super important. But when there's 3 individuals in a population, we need to just leave them there and document them some other way. So, but yeah, so anyways, the tools of the trade remain very much the same as we document natural history. And here we are doing that at the BioBlitz event last year. We have a Roaring Fork Audubon Society member, Mary and Maddie, here out with us last summer. And this is Asa, a CMC student who came out with us. And that was good fun. So these tools work great. And almost all of the biodiversity that's been documented on Earth has been done this way. But we have some new really nifty tools. This is one that we're hoping to put to work in Colorado soon. It's a thing called eDNA. And you can collect very trace samples of DNA from water bodies and detect species in them. You can tell if there's otters or amphibians or fish or particular species in a water body this way without ever seeing them. And it's really cool stuff. So the power of our ability to detect these things is vastly increasing now. So, you know, we're going to venture back deep into time and look at Colorado's natural history long ago. And we'll start here with our truly psychedelic geology map of Colorado. Very few states have one like this, but this is because we had the Laramide orogeny that rose the Rocky Mountains up from 80 million years ago to 35 million years ago. And that process exposed 2 billion years of geology. Like half of the Earth's history is visible in Colorado. So it's pretty amazing that we have a state like that. And that really contributes to our biodiversity because it adds a tremendous variety of habitats that species can occupy here. So that's why there's so much biodiversity in Colorado, one of the many reasons. And so like you, I love the dioramas at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. That's the first place I go. So I recreated one for you here. This is a diorama of the Jurassic of Colorado. And this is done with meticulous detail. These are actually our species, Brachiosaurus, Allosaurus, a crocodilian, and our state dinosaur, Stegosaurus armatus, are in this scene because they lived here in Colorado. And I would encourage all of you to go and check out Dinosaur Ridge sometime. Next time you drive down to Denver, if you haven't been there, it's right where I-70 first hits Denver, near where 470 connects. And it's a state natural area and a national natural landmark. And you can see remains of all 4 of these critters in the rock there as impressions from footprints and fossils. And it's such a cool site. They have a great museum. And this will make a mundane trip to Denver really exciting if you choose to go check this place out. I love it. And so then moving forward in time to the Cretaceous period. The Cretaceous was 145 million to 66 million years ago. And so these are 2 of the classic species of the Cretaceous period, the late Cretaceous, just before the Chicxulub event, which was the giant meteor that hit the Yucatan Peninsula and wiped out the dinosaurs and all of the aquatic reptiles except for turtles that were extant during the Cretaceous period. And so here we have Tyrannosaurus rex and Triceratops. We also have grass because the grasses evolved in the Cretaceous period. That was the first time we had grasses on Earth. So then, there are some kids here, and this is going on the internet, and I'm sorry about this, but it's kind of, but these things happen when you give talks about Tyrannosaurus rex. And so you can see evidence of these 2 beasts at a place called the Triceratops Trail, which is in Golden. It's just a little bit east of Dinosaur Ridge. So you could make a whole little day out of this to go check out both of those places. They're really neat. And so then after that, there was the Chicxulub event that I mentioned, and you can see evidence of that at several locations around Colorado. And there's a really nice outcrop of the KPG boundary, it's now called, at Trinidad Lake State Park. And you can see the line in the rock where the all the ejecta and the parts of the meteor can be seen in the strata there. It's really cool stuff. So, so after the dinosaurs went extinct, we're in the period called the Paleogene, which was from 66 million years ago to 23 million years ago. And it was during that time that the modern flora of Colorado started to evolve. We still had redwoods in Colorado at that time, but we also, as the inland sea was retreating and the Rockies kept rising, the climate really changed in Colorado and places started to dry out. And that's when things like ponderosa pine and a lot of our really desert shrubs started to evolve as part of this Madro-Tertiary geoflora. A great thing to throw around at a party if you want to sound smart. So another thing that happened during the Paleogene is the La Garita event. And this is a mind-boggling thing that happened in Colorado. And this big brown blob here is where the La Garita event occurred. This was the Earth's largest volcanic eruption ever. There's no other record anywhere in the geologic history of a bigger volcanic eruption. This thing's 3 times bigger than the giant eruption of Yellowstone that created the caldera that Yellowstone National Park is in. And Colorado, we never get credit for this. People are always talking about Yellowstone and the supervolcano. Well, we have the supervolcano in Colorado, but ours is dormant. We don't have cool geysers and stuff. So, all right. But the La Garita event ejected 15,000 cubic miles of stuff in one cataclysmic kablooey. Like, that's huge. That's like a whole mountain range. And, I tried to calculate this volume, and it's something like 20 by 30 miles, 1 mile deep. Just, wow. So that's a big volcanic eruption, and the red stuff shows where there's volcanics left over from that. And so we have some of those right here in near Mount Sopris. There's some ejecta from the La Garita event. And around this time, there were plutons that are magma coming up from the deep that didn't actually break the surface that created the West Elk Mountains. So that was around the same time that our mountains around here formed, some of them. So it's pretty neat stuff. And while we're on the topic of volcanoes, there's a much more recent volcanic eruption near here that you drive past all the time at Dotsero. I don't know if all of you know, but there is a caldera just off the highway right there. And that was only 4,200 years ago. So that's crazy because there were people around Colorado at that time, and it would be interesting to know if they saw this. And that magma chamber that created that eruption is the same magma chamber that heats up the hot springs at Glenwood Springs. So it's still doing something. And if you want to see La Garita, you can go visit it at the Wheeler Geologic Area, which is another one of Colorado's state natural areas. And that's down in Mineral County. So we're going to leap forward in time quite a bit now from La Garita and go into the Pleistocene, which was a recent period, relatively speaking, of 1.8 million years ago to 10,000 years ago. And that's when we had a lot of ice age events in Colorado and throughout the world. So in Colorado, the ice age really wrote a story on our mountains, all of our big cirques, everywhere you go. You probably skied on some today. Are remains of the ice age glaciers that carved out the big U-shaped valleys in Colorado. And so a lot of us know about that. But what a lot of us don't know is that there's all sorts of other cool ice age stories in Colorado. And this one's one of my favorites because I'm a botanist. And this little thing called the Greenland primrose, Primula egalaxensis, is a fairly rare primrose. It's quite rare in Colorado, and it's sort of rare across boreal Canada and Greenland and Iceland. And during the Ice Age, we think that this plant was fairly common down in the United States, but when it was much colder. And then as the ice receded, the range of this plant receded back north to where it is now. But it stuck around in a couple of weird little spots in Colorado where we have these relict habitats that have remained very stable since the Ice Age and are still very much like it was during the Ice Age. And this is a really cool one. This place is called High Creek Fen. It's a nature conservancy preserve in South Park. And it's open to the public, and you can turn off the highway there south of Fairplay and go check High Creek Fen out. And there's a whole bunch of other weird, rare plants there, and this relict primrose. So, then of course the snow mastodon site at Snowmass here is the best preserved ice age ecosystem, certainly in Colorado. It might be almost anywhere. It really is phenomenal in the degree to which all of the elements of the ecosystem are preserved here at the snow mastodon site. So we've got some pretty cool Ice Age stuff right here in our neck of the woods. So now we're going to move forward in time to the present day, and we're going to take a tour across Colorado and explore our natural history from the eastern Colorado Plains biome through the Colorado Rocky Mountains biome, and then end with the western Colorado valleys and plateaus. And this is the classic elevation diagram of Colorado that shows all of the tremendous diversity of elevations we have from 4,000 feet to 14,000 feet. And this is why we just have so many more interesting species here than Kansas does. So, not to knock on Kansas, but starting out at the plains, these are the two major ecological systems of the plains. It's the sand sage prairie here. It's found on sandier sites, and the shortgrass prairie. And the shortgrass prairie has long been home to the bison, which is really the boss of the prairie. And here they're being released again at the Soapstone Prairie Natural Area, which is north of Fort Collins a few miles. It's a city of Fort Collins natural area. And if you're on the Front Range and want to see an amazing place, this Soapstone natural area is so cool. And now there's bison there, so you can go and see the bison in their native habitat. And it's pretty exciting stuff. Watching them thunder out of this enclosure was just a memorable life experience. So on the plains, we've got some areas that are pretty important for biodiversity conservation, and this is one at the Pawnee Buttes. And we have identified a larger area around Pawnee Buttes that we've named the Fritz Knopf Prairie Potential Conservation Area. And we named it after Fritz. He's a scientist who studied the birds of the shortgrass prairie for many years. He passed away just a couple years ago, so we renamed this after him. And these are a couple of the birds that he studied, the mountain plover and the McCown's longspur. And these are fairly rare species of the shortgrass prairie. And so here's what Fritz figured out is kind of going on. There's a kind of gradient across the shortgrass prairie of intensity of grazing. And that is how the species there evolved, because of the way the bison grazed on the prairie. Was that some areas were very intensely grazed, others weren't touched for many years. And so the suite of grassland birds evolved to live on different heights of grass, areas with different heights of grass. So those two we just looked at, the mountain plover and the McCown's longspur, like places with really, really short grass. But there's a bunch of other species that like the grass a little bit taller. Also out on the plains, we have some pretty cool animals. Of course, the black-tailed prairie dog and the burrowing owl are the really keystone species for the shortgrass prairie. The swift fox is a fox that is native to the prairie, and it requires pretty large landscapes for it to remain viable. And then, of course, the lesser prairie chicken, which has just about gone extinct in Colorado. Colorado Parks and Wildlife is working really hard to try to maintain a viable population of that species here. And then we have this. This is a threatened species on the endangered species list. It's called the Oenothera coloradensis. And that one's found in wet, swale-y type sites out on the plains, which is why it's so rare, because there's not very many of those. And then we have places out on the shortgrass prairie that are truly mind-boggling, because people don't even realize Colorado is like this. This is in far southeastern Colorado, about an hour and a half east of Trinidad. This is a ranch called the J.E. Canyon Ranch that we first started working on in 2007 as part of a biodiversity inventory of southeastern Colorado that we got funded by Great Outdoors Colorado. And the rancher who owns this ranch is a fascinating person. His name was Jerry Winger. If you've ever played in an orchestra, you've probably seen Winger on your music stand, and that was him. He owned this ranch, and he became really passionate about this amazing place, which really would hold up as a national park. This is a 50,000 acre ranch with a Purgatory River going through it. And it has an amazing amount of biodiversity. It has, the river flows continuously there, and we have there's only native fish of the plains in that reach of the river. There's no non-native fish in the river there. And lots of other really amazing things. And this is now a Nature Conservancy preserve. So some of the things there, like dinosaur footprints, amazing rock art from Native Americans who've been there. This is a long-billed curlew, rare shorebird that nests on the shortgrass prairie. There's a resident herd of bighorn sheep there out on the plains. We know they used to do that a lot more, but here we still have them. And so it's a pretty cool place. So we're going to leave the plains now and go on up into the Rocky Mountains, the biome that we're in now. And we'll start on the foothills. And these are three key systems of the foothills. The Foothills Shrublands, which you can see all around Fort Collins where I live. This is a rare shrubland type dominated by mountain mahogany. And these Oakton mixed mountain shrublands are another system, along with xeric tallgrass prairie. And xeric tallgrass prairie is really cool. It's full of rare butterflies. So some of the rare plants there include the Bell's twin pod, an endemic species to Colorado, just to 2 counties in Colorado. This federally listed Preble's meadow jumping mouse that only lives in front range streams. Yeah, so yeah, of course that's rare. And then this is a gay feather that's really rare on the front range foothills. We also have a listed endangered butterfly, the Pawnee montane skipper, in these habitats. We have these really weird plants in the foothills that are woodland prairie relicts. Long ago, the prairies were a little bit wetter, and we had a connection of forest from the mountains to the Midwest. And so that was contiguous habitat for species that now occur in little tiny pockets in Colorado and are more common somewhere out in like Wisconsin or Michigan or Missouri or something. So these are a couple of those woodland prairie relics. Moving up in elevation, we start to get into the ponderosa pine savannas, and then the lodgepole pines. And higher we have subalpine forest and then alpine tundra. And at various elevations we also have some really amazing montane grasslands. And a couple of the animals that our program's working on a lot are the boreal toad, which is a very rare toad that's suffering from fungal disease that's attacking populations of it. This toad is only found at very high elevations. It's the only toad living at the high elevations in Colorado. And then the Townsend's big-eared bat, which has some very nice maternal roosting colonies here near us along the down valley from us. And we're worried about this bat because of a disease called white nose syndrome that's been attacking bats on the East Coast, and it's moved west across the country, and it isn't known in Colorado yet. So we're monitoring those bats to try to observe what happens. And so right around here, we have a bunch of rare plants that are found in the mountains. And this Harrington's penstemon is pretty neat. You can see this thing in June driving along I-70 right around Eagle. There's some nice populations of it right on the side of the road there. And if you look for these blue flowers, you can probably see Harrington's penstemon on your drives on I-70. You have to look really closely to be sure it's not Osterhout's penstemon, because Osterhout's penstemon has stamens that don't come out of the flower. Harrington's has stamens that stick out of the flower, so you have to pull off I-70, and that's kind of scary. So I definitely don't try to see that in the moving car. That's there are botanists who try to do this. That's not a good thing to do. But there's a whole bunch of others that are really nifty. Here's another one that was discovered at the first BioBlitz we had at Spring Valley. The good neighbor bladderpod has only been known from the area around Montrose, and it was just found up at Spring Valley Ranch in 2016 as part of our BioBlitz. So that's a huge range extension for that very rare plant. So yeah, it's fun to be a botanist and always be talking about things like bladderpods. Let's move west now into the western plateaus of Colorado. A lot of those are dominated by pinyon juniper woodlands. We have the canyon country that has a tremendous amount of endemic species in it. And this is Uniweep seep, which is an alcove almost straight west of here where water's seeping out between layers of sandstone. And we have an amazing diversity of rare species in that seep. And then we also have some really interesting things like the black swift, which lives here at Rifle Falls. And black swifts only nest behind waterfalls. So that's a pretty tough go of it in Colorado if you only nest behind waterfalls. They're not endemic to Colorado, but there are several places in the state where they live, and Rifle Falls is one of them. And if you want to see them at Rifle Falls, go there kind of later in the day, and you might see them come flying back into their nests, and that's pretty fun. So in the Western Plateaus, we have some really endangered fish. These are the 4 of the endangered fish of the Upper Colorado River Basin. These are big water fish that depend on, that need to be in big rivers with a flooding regime to remain viable. And the bony-tailed chub is arguably the rarest animal in Colorado because its populations are now mostly being propped up by hatchery efforts that Colorado Parks and Wildlife is doing. And then we have, this is one of my favorite rare plants, the parachute penstemon, Penstemon debilis. It only lives at 5 little tiny populations near Grand Junction in spots like this. And this is the slide that I don't show to the risk management people at CSU. And so, and then of course sagebrush. Our sagebrush shrublands of the West Slope are dominated by about 3 different species of sagebrush, and they are home to some very interesting rare species, including these 2, which are the greater sage grouse and the Gunnison sage grouse. And in far northwestern Colorado, we have a lot of habitat for the greater sage grouse. And then down around the Gunnison Basin and farther to the southwest, barely into Utah, is where the Gunnison sage grouse lives. And these are becoming very rare birds, and they face a lot of threats, mostly due to human impacts on the landscape. And so I wanted to also, you got to talk about wetlands when you talk about natural history, because in Colorado, they're so important. Only these hollow bars tell you the percent of our landscape that's occupied by those systems. And wetlands only occupy 2% of the surface of Colorado. But the colorful bars on this graph show you the number of species at risk that are known from each of those habitats. So the wetlands are vastly disproportionately important for conservation in Colorado because so many of our species at risk depend on them. And overall, 75% of all of our wildlife species depend on wetlands at some stage of their life history. So conserving that 2% of Colorado is of very high importance. And we're working on lots of wetland conservation projects at our program because of that. And this is fun because it's weird, but these are all wetlands. And a lot of people are like, okay, well, where's the water? And in almost all of Colorado's wetlands, you can't see the water. And so this top left one is a fen in the White River National Forest nearby here. And fens are ancient peatlands. They're another part of our Ice Age story. They're left over from the Ice Age. And then we have a riparian area and a greasewood flat and then a wet meadow in the mountains. The other habitat that's really important for our biodiversity are the barrens. And the barrens are sedimentary rock outcrops throughout the state. We have them on the west slope and the east slope where they're really lousy, crappy soils on these barrens, and only a few plants can tough it out and survive on the barrens. So a lot of our endemic species are plants that are specialized to live on shale barrens. And so here in the valley, we have a lot of Menifee Shale, Mancos Shale, and we have rare plants on a lot of those outcrops. And these are some of them. These two are on the endangered species list. And this one's out west as well. And this one's actually lives down by Pueblo. So, you got to think about climate change now with everything. But we've made this graph that shows annual precipitation on the Y and annual temperature on the X. And the dots indicate these systems that we've just looked at and where their temperature and precipitation intersect now. And in the future, modeling this out to 2060, we think that these boxes are where that environmental space is going to exist that those places are in now. So those systems are going to be existing in very different environmental conditions, and we don't know yet what's going to happen to them because of that. So I wanted also to talk about the people of Colorado, and I love this bumper sticker because pretty much everyone who has it isn't really, like, I was born in Aurora, and I'm pulling musk thistles out of my garden that are probably more native than me because they've had more generations here in Colorado than I have. So, but we do have a lot of people that have lived in Colorado for a very long time. The Utes have been in this valley for a long time. Some of our other tribes are the Pawnee, the Cherokee, Comanche, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, and they were the tribes that were besieged at the Sand Creek Massacre. Before them, we had ancestral Puebloans living in the cliffs down by Mesa Verde and canyons of the ancients. We also had before them the Folsom people, and we have really good evidence of them having been here around 10,000 years ago. And one of the most famous Folsom sites in the whole country is near Fort Collins. It's called the Lindemeyer site, and it's at the Soapstone Prairie Natural Area where the bison also are. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, go check it out. That's where they found a Folsom point jammed into the vertebrae of a bison antiquus, the extinct species of bison that they hunted back then. So pretty definitive evidence that they were hunting bison. So, but yeah, that's a slam dunk case right there. That's even better than the glove. But okay, but we don't have to talk about that. So I wanted to talk about some of my heroines, my favorite people in the natural history world, and this is one of my heroines, Alice Eastwood, a truly amazing person who was a botanist in the formative days of Colorado, who was born in Toronto, and she was raised in a convent by a priest who was a botanist, and he made her become really interested in botany, instilled a love of it in her. And in 1873, her father asked her to come out to Colorado. He was running a store and needed some help. So she finished high school in Denver. And then her father did all right with the storekeeping and invested in some real estate. And that real estate investment allowed her to be able to live full-time as a botanist and just go be a botanist all the time. And at that time, she started hiking a lot and traveling around on the trains around Colorado. She became renowned as a hiker. She joined the hiking clubs that were all a bunch of men, and she out-hiked those men wearing a dress that goes down to here, and is truly legendary as a hiker. She's one of the stories I heard is that she hiked all the way from Boulder to Granby one time. So she's an amazing person outdoors, an amazing botanist, and we have collections from all over Colorado made by her where she rode the trains and would get off the trains and collect there at the train stops. And she was such a good hiker and such a good naturalist that she was asked to take Alfred Russel Wallace up Gray's Peak when he came to visit. He's the co-discoverer of evolution along with Charles Darwin. So she ended up moving out to San Francisco to become the curator of the California Academy of Sciences herbarium. And during that time, as she was, when she got there, she published this Popular Flora of Denver, Colorado. And she became the editor of the journal Zoe, which was a natural history journal that came out of the California Academy of Sciences. And so Alice has a deep legacy here in Colorado from the great work she did. And a lot of species are named after her because of that. She described a lot of species, discovered a lot of them, and got them named after her. So this one, Aliciella, is named after her first name, Alice. This is an extremely rare plant that's only found on top of 2 mountains in the San Juans that hadn't been seen since 1892 and got rediscovered in 2005. Really cool stuff. And Mimulus eastwoodii is named after her. And this is a picture from Unaweep seep of that rare, it's a rare monkey flower. Here's another one. If you want a good adventure, go find this thing. Alice collected this in 1892 near Grand Junction somewhere. And the only one anyone has ever seen since then is the specimen that she collected. We don't know if this thing is extinct or it just hasn't been found yet. I'm betting that it's still out there and somebody has to go find where the little nook where Alice found it. So that's a huge botanical mystery still existing in our state. So the reason that Alice Eastwood moved out to San Francisco was because of Mary Katherine Brandy. So she is yet another amazing woman in Colorado's natural history story. And she was born in Tennessee and moved to California in 1849 with her family for the gold rushes. She was only the 3rd woman ever to enter medical school in the University of California. And so she started working at the California Academy of Sciences herbarium in 1879, and she was a medical student. Back then, you were also studying botany when you were a medical student. So she married a guy named Townsend Stiff around then, and they were a really great team and described tons of Colorado's plants. They really moved botany forward in Colorado with their discoveries. And then she hired Alice Eastwood, and Alice Eastwood came out to curate the herbarium. And that's when Alice Eastwood really became famous, because she was curating the herbarium in the 1906 quake that destroyed the California Academy of Sciences. And at that time, Alice had innovated a new way to curate an herbarium. She had the idea that the type specimens, those are the ones that were used to describe a new species, that those should be kept in a special place. So she put them all in a special cabinet. Then when the quake destroyed the building, the building was barely standing, and she, after the quake, she climbed in a window and climbed up the handrail to the 6th floor of the California Academy of Sciences. And she was able to yank those 2 trunks of those type specimens out of the cabinet and haul them somehow down the crumbling stairway and hauled them 2 miles over San Francisco roads going like this somehow, and got them to safety. After that, the fire swept through and destroyed what was left of San Francisco in that part. So she is a true hero for having done that. And Mary Katherine Brandy is the reason that Alice was out there. Another one of our famous female botanists in Colorado is Hazel Schmoll. You'll note a pattern here. These botanists live a long time, so I'm a botanist, I'm hoping that but Hazel Schmoll she grew up in Ward, Colorado, above Boulder, and her first job after she finished her master's thesis was to mount all of Alice Eastwood's plant specimens onto herbarium paper. And then she was at that time working for the Colorado Historical Society, and then she did a PhD dissertation on the vegetation of Chimney Rock, which is down by Mesa Verde. And she, in her role with the Natural Historical Society, lobbied for Colorado to have a state flower, and she nominated the columbine for that. So it's because of Hazel that the columbine is our state flower. And this rare milk vetch at Mesa Verde is named after Hazel, the Astragalus schmallier. This is the Chapin Mesa milk vetch, a very rare species there. And my last heroine that I wanted to introduce you to is my friend Jen Ackerfield, who is alive and well. She's the curator of the herbarium at Colorado State University. She started writing The Flora of Colorado in about the year 2000, and it was finally published in 2015. After a period of her life that was full of struggles and challenges, and it's so amazing that she wrote this. It is a beautiful flora, and I would highly suggest that you go and buy one. It's a great book if you're into plant identification. And so she's still our curator now. And so I did promise you a poem, and I want to make good on that promise. So the poem that I want to share with you was written by Colorado's first poet laureate. His name was Thomas Hornby Farrell. And this poem is, you can see this inside the dome of the Colorado State Capitol building. And I've set it along with photos by a member of our staff named Michael Menifee. And I'll kind of close out this talk with this poem for you. Here is a land where life is written in water. The West is where the water was and is. Father and son of old mother and daughter, following rivers up immensities, of range and desert, thirsting the sundown ever, crossing a hill to climb a hill still drier, naming tonight a city by some river, a different name from last night's camping fire. Look to the green within the mountain cup. Look to the prairie parched for water's lack. Look to the sun that pulls the oceans up. Look to the cloud that gives the oceans back. Look to your heart and may your wisdom grow. To the power of lightning and to peace of snow. So thank you very much. Well, if anyone has questions, I'm happy to field those. Yes, sir.
How long have you been doing your job?
I started at Natural Heritage Program in 1999. So the job I have now I've been doing for 8 years. Before that I was a botanist.
And if you could hold your question until I can get the microphone around,
Oh,
it'll allow people
sorry.
watching to hear what you've got to ask.
Thank you for that presentation. It was awesome.
Thank you.
You had a graph of the time and the precipitation expected
Yes.
with climate change. And did it suggest that total precipitation was going to increase? Because it kind of looked like that, and I'm just
There's
curious.
a pretty wide confidence interval around what we know about precipitation change in our climate models. So some of them say it's going to get drier, some we expect it might get wetter, some it might get the same, and a lot of them it might become more variable and unpredictable. So it's pretty tough to know exactly what's going to happen.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I have kind of a silly question, but as someone who has traveled to so many of Colorado's natural areas and explored so many of them, top two that you would recommend going out of your way to visit?
Ooh, wowie. Yeah. Top 2. Well, yeah. Well, one of them, the place of late that has blown my mind more than anything else was the J.E. Canyon Ranch. Unfortunately, it's not that easy to visit it. I don't know how one would go about doing that. Would have to work with the Nature Conservancy to go see that place. Oh boy. Yeah. My favorite one is always like the one I just went to. Yeah.
You can settle on one if you're
I mean, gosh, I think of all the wilderness hikes I've done and stuff around here, and yeah, I love all of those. It's just pretty hard to pick one out of them. You know, in terms of places that, you know, that are really just sort of mind-bending kinds of, I think Soapstone Prairie Natural Area, I'd put that one on the list too. It's so close to Front Range communities, but it's this amazingly preserved place that where you can really see what the shortgrass prairie's like. So I love that place too.
Any last questions?
How do we continue to protect these places when we've got a administration that doesn't seem to care about it?
Stay active locally. You can do so much to advocate for conservation in your community. I think, you know, here in this community, there's so many nonprofits and conservation organizations that are doing great work. And they are really how I think we can move the needle. And I think that can happen nationally, but it can happen right here in your community. And ACES is doing amazing things. And I think getting behind organizations like that gives me so much hope.
We'll do one more if anybody has another question.
There was one in the back before.
It was about is this working? The Eco Blitz that's at the Powers Ranch.
Yeah.
So it's a 1 or 2 day commitment, and then is it also, I know that there's like ranching that goes on up there, and there's like an art center that is it kind of, I mean, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, I don't know much about the other things, but we are inviting landowners. We invited them before too, from the area, and really hope that they can come this year. And the commitment can be just a few hours if you wanted to stop by. It's easy to pop by and do a bird walk with us in the morning or something like that. So once we start to narrow that down, you can decide what you'd like to do. And please, if you're interested, take my card and get in touch. We'd love for people to come out. So, okay, thank you.